This is the bike that I've been using to average over 30 miles an hour in time trials, or 48 kilometers per hour. It's the absolutely rapid Orbea Ordu TT bike, and you may remember the stock version of this bike being used by Si in various videos, including the 4 versus 1 and all the other videos in which he's, well, completely embarrassed us. But I've taken the bike off him and I've been racing on it, and I've modified it and completely tricked it out to make it even faster. So I'm going to go through all the modifications and explain how they make the bike faster, and, well, because I love you, perform the obligatory free hub sound check as well, because I know that's why you're all here. I'm not going to dwell on the frame of the bike too much because Si's covered a lot of that in a previous video when the bike launched, but it is proper aero, and it does have this really intriguing fork design, which I still think looks really radical, with this mono riser coming up for the extensions, and then it's just so narrow when you look at it head on, and that's thanks, well, it's narrower than like any bike I've ever seen, and that's thanks to a kind of rather ingenious bayonet design where you've got a bearing resting here and a bearing resting there, but it's not the normal kind of fork tube going inside, you know, the head tube design that you get on most bikes. Sticking with the front of the bike, you can see the first big obvious modification I've made, which is to completely change the cockpit. So I've taken out the standard round bar extensions that slotted into this base plate, and I've plugged the holes and I've fitted some Wattshop Anamoi extensions. I've also, where I've plugged the holes, I've just used some bar end stoppers and some sort of custom sort of aero shaped ones at the back that kind of make them look like little missiles. Now, the idea with extensions like this is they can help make you faster in a number of ways. So rather than just a round bar, they're more conformed to the shape of your arm. So this is a bit more comfortable as it spreads the pressure out along the length of the arm, not just sort of on the elbow. And they make your arm shape less of a cylinder. So it helps make the shape of your forearm a little bit more aerodynamic. They also allow for lots of adjustments so that you can angle them up more, and that's something that I've found through testing in the real world and in the wind tunnel, that by having my hands higher, it actually makes me more aerodynamic. It does vary from person to person though. And they also have these little hand sections here where I've got the DI2 buttons mounted in the end, and they allow me to hold my hands close together in a really nice, neat, consistent aerodynamic position. I've just mounted these extensions onto the standard base plate that came with the bike, and ideally, if you really wanted to tidy it up, you could still reduce some frontal area, but you'd have to create some kind of custom base plate for that. But that's something I might set myself as a little project in the future, because it still could make the bike a little bit more aerodynamic. You'll also see I've used lots of black insulation tape in various different locations, just to cover up little holes and things and just make the bike a little bit more aerodynamic. You might also notice that the saddle to bar drop here isn't actually that low. Where my arm pads are is actually quite high relative to the saddle, and as little as sort of 15 years ago, the conventional thinking was that you wanted to get your arms as low as possible. So you saw some quite severe saddle to bar drops on time trial bikes. But what we've subsequently found through lots of testing is that that isn't necessarily faster, and that's for a number of reasons. It can be comfort, and it can be harder to get the power out in that more extreme position. But also I've found that when I've tested it aerodynamically, having my elbows a little bit higher actually helps me to get my head down lower, because my shoulders are more relaxed, and so I can then tuck my head in line with my back much better, and that makes me far more aerodynamic. While I'm on the subject of the saddle, it's a Selle Italia SLR boost, so the slightly shorter version of a normal SLR. It's not a time trial specific saddle, but it's what I use on the road and on the time trial bike as well. I just find it really comfortable. It works for me, so if it isn't broke, don't fix it. I'm going to tell you about the drivetrain now, which is my favourite bit of the bike, starting with that massive 58 tooth chainring. It's just a massive dinner plate, isn't it? And it's solid rather than having gaps in it to help make it more aerodynamic gains. Now, the intention isn't to ride the 5811, that's a massive gear, and I'd struggle to turn that unless I was riding downhill. But the idea is that you get a more efficient chain line when you're riding in the middle of the block on, say, a 17 tooth or an 18 tooth sprocket. So rather than ride the 5311 gear, you would ride a 5817 or 5818. And then that helps make the drivetrain more efficient as well with regards to the chain, because the chain doesn't have to bend as much and therefore actuate along each link as much, because there's a bigger ring at the back and a bigger ring at the front. It's not going through as tight an angle, and that helps reduce friction. To help further reduce friction, the chain is a special muck-off nanotube chain that's, well, it's a standard Shimano Dura-Ace chain that's then been specially treated by muck-off to make it even faster, and Team Ineos uses these chains too, so, well, I mean, they don't leave anything to chance. Now, you might also be wondering where the front mech is, and that's another important detail. I've removed it. I've turned the bike into a one-by setup, and so the front chainring isn't a standard chainring. It has a special narrow wide tooth profile on it so that you don't drop the front chain. Some people run chain catchers to help, well, prevent the chain from dropping, but touch wood, I've not had a problem with this. It seems to stay in place pretty well, and you don't tend to ride time trial bikes on bumpy courses. Can be an issue, but I don't find it to be a major one. Now, the crankset on here is another key sort of detail. It's a Quarq Powermeter, but the cranks are shorter than what I'd normally use. So traditionally, I've tended to just use 172.5mm cranks, because that's what pretty much every bike in my size comes with. But I've shortened to 170mm cranks, only a couple of millimeters shorter, but I find it actually helps me a great deal when I'm riding a time trial bike. And the thinking behind it is that it helps open up your hip angle, which then allows your glutes to fire. And if you have weak hip flexors, which perhaps I do, then it can mean that you struggle to get the power out when the torque's quite high. And that is something that I have struggled with, getting the power out in a TT position. And I found that having slightly shorter cranks has really helped me. And I know that it's helped other people as well, but you know, it's an individual thing. And then on those, we've got the Speedplay Aero pedals. These aren't the latest Wahoo Speedplay one. They're a set of older ones that I've got that I'm still using because, well, they've still got plenty of life in them. But again, these are really cool aero detail. You've probably seen them before. Bradley Wiggins famously used them in his hour record, and so did I. But they integrate beautifully into the aero cleat on the bottom of the shoe. And testing has shown that they save typically around 5 watts at 45 kilometers an hour over a standard 3-bolt cleat and pedal system, which, I mean, it's a marginal gain again, but pretty significant. Wheels are a key component in making a time trial bike faster, and the Ordu being a disc brake bike means I've got a disc on the rear. Now, discs through COVID times have been like hen's teeth, really hard to get hold of, but thankfully Aerocoach has lent me their Aeox disc so that I can, well, make these videos, which is nice. Thanks for that. Now, it's a tubeless ready disc, but I'm not running it tubeless. I've got it set up with a Pirelli P0 TT tyre and a latex inner tube inside. Same for the front as well, same tyre and tube, and that's a Zipp 808 NSW on the front, very fast wheel. I've got a 23mm one on the front, so that's slightly less frontal area on the front, slightly more aerodynamic, and a 25mm on the back, slightly better rolling resistance. Aero is not important, and this disc is optimised for a 25mm tyre too. If you compare a tyre setup like this compared to, you know, the worst case scenario that you can have on a road bike, you're easily looking at around 20 watts difference, which is absolutely massive and one of the biggest gains sort of on the bike as a whole. Now, onto the sort of a detail on the frame, which I've had a lot of questions about on social media, and that is what's going on with the frame box and stuff at the bottom. Now, the frame box and integrated water bottle are there to help make the bike more aerodynamic. They act as fairings and increase the effective size of the down tube. Now, the frame box is like a storage solution for your sandwiches and your inner tubes and stuff, and it's technically not UCI legal. It's legal for triathletes. The water bottle is UCI legal, and the bike is faster with both of these appendages attached to it. However, the UCI have no jurisdiction here, so the faster frame box aero fairing is staying on. The weight of the bike is, well, it's well over 8 kilograms. Most time trial bikes are, but in truth, I haven't actually weighed it to get the exact weight because not really that bothered. The weight of the bike isn't hugely important on time trial bikes. It's all about aero. Aero trumps weight here, massively here. Right, so. Right. Sounds good, though, doesn't it? Nice. So the other thing that you can't totally appreciate when the bike is stood still is, in addition to a cool free hub sound, this bike sounds incredible when you're riding it along, is it's sort of cutting through the air with the big deep 808 and the disc wheel. It just makes this kind of like sound, which is, when you're riding fast, it's amazing, and it is so slippery to ride. Other details on the bike, I've got the Wahoo bolt head unit mounted nice and neatly between the bars. It's really tucked away and really neat. And then I've got an 1130 cassette on the back, although I do change the cassette depending on the terrain that I'd be racing on, but generally find that you don't need much easier gears than that. In most time trials are flat, so it's adequate to have a 5830 as a sort of bailout gear. And then any other modifications I might do to make the bike quicker, well, ideally I think it'd be cool to have an oversized pulley wheel system on the back, but I haven't managed to source one of those and get my grubby little hands on one yet. First world problems, but yeah, there you go. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this look at the rather rapid Orbea Ordu TT bike now that it's been customized. And if you have and you found it interesting, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see Si in action on this bike, now that I've tricked it out and made it even quicker, well, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments down below. See you later.